Next up, we'll hear from someone who grew up outside of Boston, Massachusetts, like I did, but who I know loves New York City as much as I do, Bill de Blasio. In the early 1990s, Bill worked in Mayor David Dinkins' administration before moving to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under then-Secretary Andrew Cuomo. And he played a leading role in Hillary Clinton's successful 2000 campaign for the U.S. Senate right here in New York State. He served on the City Council, representing the Park Slope area of Brooklyn from 2002 to 2009, when he was elected the city's public advocate. Over our 12 years of working together in government, while we haven't always seen eye to eye, Bill and I were often on the same page when it came to improving public health by banning smoking in bars and restaurants, fighting obesity, and restricting the portion sizes of large sugary drinks. We also found common cause on issues like illegal guns and climate change. He, like Joe, is committed to the idea that cities must be innovators, and we're glad to have him here. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill de Blasio.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to first thank Mayor Bloomberg for inviting us all here today and for co-hosting this extraordinary gathering of urban leaders and thinkers from across the country. Now, Mr. Mayor, you've been a leader on many of the issues addressed over the past 2 days, from transportation to technology to resiliency, and it's no surprise that New York solutions have been so central to the conversation that has taken place here. I also want to thank the Atlantic and the Aspen Institute for co-hosting this event with Bloomberg Philanthropies, and Walter Isaacson for moderating our session today. Over the past few years, something truly extraordinary has happened. As of 2010, for the first time in history, more people in the world live in cities and the urban areas that support them than outside of them. Urban areas are gaining more than 60 million people every year. Now, this isn't just a phenomenon at work in China, India, and other developing countries. In the United States, a similar movement to the cities is underway. This population grew by 12% in the first decade of this century, far outpacing the country's growth rate as a whole. Now, we feel it right here in New York, where for the first time in more than 60 years, more people moved into the city in the past year than moved away. According to projections, New York City is expected to grow to more than 9 million residents by 2030. For all the advances of the digital age, we're rediscovering that proximity still matters. On the West Coast, more and more tech companies are foregoing sprawling campuses in the Silicon Valley and moving to San Francisco, revitalizing neighborhoods in the process. In Seattle, instead of busing workers to a suburban campus, Amazon plans to move thousands of its employees into the heart of downtown. And here in New York, we are experiencing our own tech boom, powered by a simple idea that millions of people and dozens of industries functioning in close proximity to one another is something that just can't be replaced by video chats and emails. And it's that proximity, that the bringing together of creative thinkers and new ideas in every industry and discipline, that is causing so many innovative and even disruptive solutions to the world's most pressing challenges. From education to public health to fighting crime, the solutions increasingly can be found here in our cities. And they have to be found here. While our Congress has ground to a halt in a cycle of partisan paralysis, Cities are moving forward with innovative solutions and working to solve our most urgent problems. This is not, however, a uniquely American problem. Just look at the dysfunction prevalent in the European Union. National governments in our time are failing to serve as catalysts for action, requiring cities to fill the void of creativity and innovation. Yet the problem seems particularly pronounced here at home. While there was a time when innovation in the United States was driven at the federal level, the New Deal, the space program, the GI Bill, and the mapping of the human genome are extraordinary examples. Today, we're not seeing Washington offer solutions to the unique challenges of our time. Instead, we see shutdowns. I firmly believe that some of the challenges our cities face are too vast for us to wait. It's why in the 21st century, or at least for the foreseeable first part of it, cities, led by many of the officials and experts here today, must be the laboratories for reform and the primary problem solvers. Now, Mayor Bloomberg has embraced this mission, leveraging the power of the urban idea to transform and impact society. Now, it's no secret that I've disagreed with Mayor Bloomberg from time to time. But no one can deny that his administration has made a mission of innovating new ideas that have shaped the way cities work, ideas that in fact have spread to cities and countries around the world. The 2003 smoking ban, which as Mayor Bloomberg indicated, I was proud to be an early sponsor of, the 2003 smoking ban that the mayor enacted into law has prevented an estimated 10,000 smoking-related deaths in the 5 boroughs. In large part because of it, New Yorkers now have a life expectancy of 80.9 years, 3 years longer than the national average. And we can measure its success by imitation. More than 500 cities across the country have adopted smoking bans in the years since. We see the success of New York City's bicycling program. Biking is up 60% since 2008. The designs innovated for streets of Chelsea and the East Village are now seen in the protected bike lanes on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., or on Market Street in San Francisco, and in cities across the country. And in the current administration's final year, the mayor rightly put forward a bold blueprint to bolster resiliency and protect New York City's 520 miles of coastline from the threat of climate change. A move that I predict will influence coastal cities around the world as they grapple with this emerging threat. Now, as these examples indicate, it is our mission to carry forward the tradition of the great urban idea as the solution to the unique challenges of each era. And today, I believe that one of the greatest challenges in need of urban ingenuity is the rise of income inequality and the stunning decline of economic mobility. As populations surge in cities around the world, inequality is too often thought of as a necessary byproduct of newfound urban success. The combination of rapid increases in housing prices and an economy split between low-wage service jobs for the many and high-paying jobs for the few, that combination is creating a situation like the one we have here in New York. Today, New York City, according to a report from Wealth Insight in May, is the home to more millionaires than Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston combined. While at the same time, 46% of our citizens live at or near the poverty level. Now, this is not only a challenge to our shared belief in what's fair and just, it threatens the very foundation of who we are as a city. And this inequality crisis is deepening not just here, but in cities across the country and around the world. Now, while we can and will pursue a number of ways to address income inequality in the short term, and those ways would include leveraging economic development policy to increase wages in the service sector, or increasing the supply of affordable housing and arming workers with the skills to compete for better jobs. On top of all those short-term approaches, today I would like to focus on one fundamental solution that will help us address inequality over the long term. Research shows that providing free, high-quality, early education to families in need is among the most effective ways to reduce income inequality, to increase social mobility, to raise college graduation rates, and to reduce crime. Pre-kindergarten is by no means a new idea. What is new is the concept of making full-day pre-K truly universal, of the highest quality, and free for every single child. This is no less of a transformation than the movement for universal high school education that took hold across America in the first half of the 20th century. 100 years ago, cities across this country embraced the innovation of free primary and secondary education as a part of our social contract, something we provide to each and every individual for the betterment of all. Another transformative wave came about 60 years ago, when college education evolved from not just a privilege for the elite, but evolved into a pathway to the middle class for millions, thanks to reforms like the GI Bill. Now, I firmly believe that reaching every child through early education will be no less transformative. And here's why. 85% of brain development occurs before age 5. Think about that. Before many children ever set foot inside a school, the parts of their mind that determine how they learn, how they relate to others, how they perceive abstract concepts, those parts are locked in. Kids who start behind are far more likely to stay behind. A child who does not recognize the letters of the alphabet when they enter kindergarten will likely demonstrate significantly lower reading skills by the end of first grade. But what's remarkable is how much of that can change with full-day universal pre-K, with the best educators, the most creative and cutting-edge curriculum, and the best facilities. A National Bureau of Economic Research study released this May found that pre-K can reduce the achievement gap by up to 40%. And even for the children of parents who never graduated from college, these children in the survey were 40% more likely to go on to college themselves and graduate if they were armed first with access to pre-K. Another review of the research from the Ounce of Prevention Fund found that without a high-quality early childhood intervention, an at-risk child is 25% more likely to drop out of school, 40% more likely to become a teen parent, 50% more likely to be placed in special education, 60% more likely to never attend college, and 70% more likely to be arrested for a violent crime. It's no doubt that statistics like these spurred Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, to make the case bluntly. Speaking about pre-K last year, he said, quote, "Economically speaking, early childhood programs are a good investment with inflation-adjusted annual rates of return on the funds dedicated to these programs estimated to reach 10% or higher. Very few alternative investments can promise that kind of return," end quote. Greater achievement in school, higher likelihood to attend college, increased chances to escape poverty. This is what government, local government, must be in the business of doing, particularly as we continue to reel from the greatest economic crisis in generations. As we all know, in the area of education, America's international competitors aren't standing still. China is moving to double the number of children with access to early education by 2020. India is on the same path. The European Union countries have embraced a target of 95% enrollment in early education by 2020. In Brazil, early education is a national constitutional right. But sadly, at the same time, The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has given the United States poor marks when it comes to our share of 4-year-olds enrolled in early childhood education. According to their most recent report, the U.S. ranks 28th out of 38 countries surveyed. Nationally, according to the White House, fewer than 30% of 4-year-olds are enrolled in high-quality preschool programs. Now, look, this is an urgent crisis, and we must begin to address it at the local level. And if we do, we would begin to realize the benefits right away. From day one, parents would be better able to work and make a living while their kids learn in a safe environment. Currently, families with children younger than 5 years old now spend on an average of 10.1% of their household budget on childcare. This is an especially difficult financial hardship for low-income families. Early child education wouldn't just ease this burden on working families, it would give those youngsters the chance to live to their very fullest potential. Children with learning disabilities would be more readily diagnosed and treated, ensuring they won't fall behind. With the right commitment to this mission, in a few years, we begin to see the signs of increased achievement in reading and comprehension in our elementary schools. Within 5 years, we'd see the benefits borne out in math and English proficiency. In just over a decade, we'd see a transformation in our on-time graduation rate, our college readiness, our workforce preparedness, and reduction in racial achievement disparities. And in the years beyond, we would begin to make a significant dent in the lack of economic mobility that has reached a crisis point in this country and around the world. So I'll conclude with this. This kind of idea is what great cities have always been about. They are not defined just by their soaring skyscrapers and majestic bridges and robust infrastructure. Rather, cities are defined most fundamentally by their extraordinary human capital. And great cities not only have the ability to attract human capital, they have the ability to create it by lifting people up and ensuring that everyone has a real opportunity to live out their dreams. This is the work of our time. Together, we must ensure that every child receives a high-quality early education as the foundation of a stronger and more just society. Thank you very much.
You know, in your talk, you stressed very strongly the need to reduce income inequality. Mr. Loader just came on this stage and talked just as strongly about the need for more economic growth. Why do you see that trade-off has to be shifted these days?
I don't see a dichotomy between the two to begin with. I think it's fair to say that we're at the point in human history where economic opportunity is most linked to education we've ever known. I think it's fair to say that a strong economy depends on a better educated workforce than ever before in human history. In that sense, if we aren't maximizing the capacity of our children by reaching them early enough, we can't have the kind of economic growth we need. And look at what's happening today with our tech sector here in the city. You know, I have said, I gave a speech at the Association for a Better New York on Friday and said, look, this is an area where I agree with the mayor fundamentally. I think his focus on economic diversification helped us to open the doors for the tech sector's growth in this city. But we have to sustain it by producing the kind of talent we need locally. We can't always import it from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And to sustain that, we need the focus on early childhood education. And in the process of focusing on the ways of fostering, let's take this sector, for example, fostering the kind of educational efforts that would provide the workforce for that sector, we're also giving people a chance to get away from low-wage, low-benefit jobs, for example, in the service sector, and have a chance at the kind of middle-class jobs that exist today. So I think economic growth goes hand in hand with developing our educational capacity, but our educational capacity is also the gateway to addressing income inequality.
In addition to increasing educational capacity, what would you do specifically to help spur innovation, entrepreneurship, technology growth in the economy?
Well, I think, as you can hear, I believe there's a robust role for government to play. And I'd love it if I could report to you today that the federal government had just woken up from its slumbers and decided to lead the way in terms of investment in research and the kinds of strategic focus that would be spurring the growth of technology in our society. That's not happening. And I don't think we have the prospect of that happening in the near term. Now, localities don't have the same sweep, obviously. We don't have the same resources at our disposal, but let's take a look at New York City. I would add to some of the policies that Mayor Bloomberg began by continuing both the educational efforts that would make more talent available to the tech sector, by looking at how we could maximize government procurement opportunities in the tech sector here. By the way, what a lot of folks in the tech sector have said to me is that they want government to catch up with their mindset in terms of procurement and doing business together, and they want government to be more flexible and work in real time to maximize common opportunities. I think there's an infrastructure question. The city is not yet fully wired. Ensuring
So how would you
that
get it to broadband wired?
I think there's two parts of that equation. One is to foster competition. In New York City and New York State, there's been a tendency over the years for individual companies to have either monopoly dynamics
In other
or
words, break up the duopoly of the cable phone.
one, demand that the contracts that we have currently, in the case of Verizon, for example, in this city, the city was supposed to be wired by next year. That's not happening yet, so that's part about enforcement of our current franchises and contracts. But two, fostering additional competition to provide an alternative methodology for getting there, or to put pressure on the existing companies.
How would you have a third or fourth competitor in that broadband market?
I think just looking at our transportation infrastructure as a physical platform for those competitors to utilize in terms of wiring the city. I think the bottom line here is that we have become too used to the notion that if a way of doing business, in this case let's take Verizon's contract, did not yield the strategic result we needed. The history, I think, of New York City and New York State government is not to be necessarily agile enough to make the kind of updating we need. I would argue this is a time where we have to move much more speedily and much more agilely to catch up with the fact that this sector has tremendous growth potential. I would also argue that to the extent we do that, we open up the possibility of this sector being a tool to reach a lot of people currently left out of our economy.
How come New York is lagging in ubiquitous broadband Wi-Fi? It would seem that it would be the city foremost in that.
I don't pretend to have the perfect analysis, but I would say again, I think, and I'm sure if I were having a private conversation with Mayor Bloomberg, we could compare notes on the history of New York City and New York State government and find a lot of common ground on the fact that there's a lot that is not modern enough yet. So I think that is part of the problem. I think, again, if you have utilities functioning outside of competition and outside of government regulation that's particularly forceful, so I'll simply say a particularly lax approach to certain regulation, it's not surprising we don't get some of the outcomes that we need. I think strategically we can't afford not to be fully wired.
And you said that would help reduce the lack of opportunity and the income inequality. How?
I think well, this is part two of the equation, and I think it gets back to I like your formulation to begin with. How does growth and addressing inequality go together? They have to go together. You cannot address inequality without growth. But growth alone doesn't address inequality unless there's a certain targeting, if you will, and I think that's where the tools of government come in. Whether you're talking about living wage legislation, whether you're talking about training programs, whether you're talking about making access to higher education. We have an extraordinary public higher education system here, which I think we have to do more to get folks who are being shut out now access to. But I think it's also working with the industries, which I believe would be well-intentioned in this regard, to basically have something of a trade-off. We want to do many of the things the industries need to be more prosperous and to grow, but we want them to work with the city to find ways to get opportunity to those who don't have it now. Some of that, to me, is a literal targeting. Look, with government investment, it's easier. One of the things I've talked about is the money we spend on construction in the city, the rezonings we do that open up development opportunities. I want to see more of a targeting in those processes to more of a preference for a hiring of people from disadvantaged communities, more of a very targeted acknowledgement that we're reaching a level of inequality that requires a certain type of aggressive intervention. I think with a private industry like the tech community, I think the will is already there to be agents of societal progress. I think there's a fair trade-off that says we're going to enable and support the industry's growth, but we want to work with the industry to target some of the opportunity to folks who are not getting it. And one last point, location, location, location. The tech sector has been, to their great credit, already focused not just on Manhattan, but largely on Brooklyn and increasingly on Queens. I think a 5-borough focus implicitly helps to bring the jobs closer to those in need.
A thriving tech and innovation and entrepreneurial sector would obviously, if it works, create more and more millionaires. Just to be clear, you're in favor of that, right? Even if it leads to more inequality to some extent.
I want to be very clear. Those who become millionaires, God bless them. I'm very clear that in the case of my vision for early child education, I would like to ask them to help. But no, of course, the prosperity is crucial to the future of the city, and we want people to do well, but we can't, let's be clear, I'm not someone who believes in a trickle-down approach. If we have prosperity, we also have to make sure that government is working on the end result of that prosperity and working to make sure that there's maximum opportunity for those who haven't had it.
Do you strongly support the vision of the Cornell Technion Engineering School?
I think it's fantastically important to the future of this city. I think it was a great example of something that government could do. Again, something you would like to see national government doing, but that has become the responsibility of local government. I commend the mayor and his team. I commend Cornell and Technion for what they're doing. But I think it's one piece of the puzzle, and that's why I emphasize also, in terms of the everyday jobs in that industry, I think the City University has a crucial role to play. And I think in the case of City University, and this is a cautionary tale, the classic example of the role of City University in the city was the striving, hardworking, working-class kid, got the education, went on, became a success, often won a Nobel Prize. It's a classic stereotype. But you're right. But that depended on, in those days, free tuition. Now, we don't propose free tuition at this point. But even the relatively modest tuition at CUNY today is out of reach of people who are feeling a level of economic stress we have not seen in previous decades. And so that's why I believe we should shift some of our economic development strategies towards both updating CUNY's programs and focusing more and more on the tech sector. You know, the 2-year STEM degree would be a great example. But also, let's face it, if the people we're trying to help can't even afford a modest tuition, that puts an onus on more financial aid as the conduit to opportunity.
In schools, some of the great innovation and entrepreneurship has come from the charter sector, KIPS and college preps, et cetera. Why would you scale back the reach of charter schools if they're being innovative?
Well, I would argue that with the current cap we have on charter schools, there's ample room, and that's been my position, to stay within the cap we have. There's ample room for a tremendous amount of innovation to continue. But I caution that today in New York City, charter schools account for 5% of our public school kids. The other 95% are in traditional public schools. That other 95% is how we will live or die. I say this always.
Do you think that charters help promote the other schools by competing and providing on newer ways of doing things?
I think a certain amount of competition implicitly is helpful. But I would argue a lot of innovation is happening in the traditional public schools too. You know, the whole smaller schools movement, which began before the current administration, but certainly was given extra strength by the current administration. That movement is based on a different type of innovation. It happened to be within a traditional public school rubric, but Lord knows the focus on smaller schools, on thematic schools, on career-focused schools, and very different teaching styles and approaches within them, the focus on portfolios in some schools, for example. There's plenty of innovation happening within the context of traditional public schools. I would argue that we have the right balance with the current charter school cap we have.
At 5%?
Well, the cap isn't fully realized yet, but the point being, I think we have the right amount now to foster a certain amount of innovation and competition. But we're never, look, no one is talking about a majority of our schools being charter schools. Let's be clear. The future of this city, and I would argue the future of the entire country, rests on traditional public schools. That's where the focus is. And I go to a more fundamental place. To some extent say, let's hold that debate for a moment on charter versus traditional school and what the outcome of that development has been. Let's go to something even more fundamental. If we're not doing early childhood universally, then I think we're missing the chance to do something much more profound in terms of lifting all boats.
And finally, you talk about reducing income inequality, but there's also a related issue of allowing an expanded middle class, a middle class in which people who aren't going to be high-tech entrepreneurs and aren't going to just be in the service industries can really get good jobs at good wages. How would you do that?
Granted, we're facing a complicated reality of a modern economy in which the growing use of technology cuts against employment levels. So I want to affirm that I'm not missing there are some bigger trends at play here that are daunting. But I would argue that some of the sectors that have grown in the time of the Bloomberg administration in this city have a substantial number of what I would call middle-class jobs. I would include among them tech, of course, film and TV, healthcare, academia. The challenge is getting those jobs to people in the 5 boroughs and to increase the proportion of folks who are disadvantaged. Again, I believe long-term that rests largely on early childhood education and continuing to strengthen our educational system. I believe after school, which is another way of lengthening the school day, it's a different way of lengthening the school day. I believe a more accessible way of lengthening the school day is another part of the puzzle. But in the here and now, some of the things we talked about, how do you help a sector to grow, but in exchange, help to focus some of the impact? Development's a great example. We obviously have a thriving real estate market at this point. There's a lot more in the way of development opportunities in the city. I've said very clearly I'd like that new development to be facilitated, even sped, but I want to find ways to target the opportunities, the construction opportunities, the permanent job opportunities that come out of development more to people who are being left out of the current economy. I think enough of those efforts are undertaken, it starts to build up a head of steam, and you really start to see a substantial number of people get to the middle class who are being shut out now. Is it perfect? By no means. But I'd say one more point I think it's very crucial. There is a question of faith in our society. There's a question of faith in a democracy. And I think the bitterness that people of this country feel, and they feel it in all parts of the country, when they look at what's happening, particularly with our Congress, the people of this country went through a profound economic dislocation in the last 5 years. But that was not an isolated incident. It was, unfortunately, an amplifying of trends that had already begun. The reduction in wages and benefits had already begun. The decline of the middle class had already begun. The fact is, people need to have faith that their government is innovating, is looking under every stone, is trying every approach to provide some uplift, to provide some new opportunity. So I am most interested in the things I'm saying because I want the material outcome for people. But a very important secondary element is the fact that it shows a response to the challenges that people face. It shows that government is not just stuck and accepting of a crisis, but is actually trying to painstakingly find its way out of the crisis. So the things I'm talking about are not going to get a middle-class job for everyone who needs it overnight. I have no illusion about that. But it will send a very clear message that government has to take responsibility for the situation, and that we're going to begin the meticulous process of getting more and more people back on their feet and then eventually to a stable economic place for them and their families.
Well, I thank you very much for a perfect summation to the entire conference we've had. It's great to see you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Blasio.
Thank you, Walt.
Great.